Hey everybody, my name is Billy Phoenix, and my primary role at North Point Ministries is Director of Staff Culture, but every other year I get to lead the team that creates and executes our two-day Drive Conference. The Drive Conference gathers ministry leaders just like you from around the world to help them go further and faster in ministry and to connect them together for encouragement and support. These 2 days also give ministry teams a chance to take a break and to have some fun and worship and refuel for the journey ahead. Because as you likely know, ministry can be hard, especially these days. And it's for that reason that I've invited Andy Stanley to come and sit down with me for a few minutes to talk about ministry in this day and age, but also to give you a little bit of a preview of some of the conversations that we're going to be having at the Drive Conference next spring. So Andy, thanks for joining us today and for your time. And I wanted to start by asking you to respond to a quote that I read very recently. And it says this: 42% of ministry leaders have considered quitting full-time ministry within the past year.
Yeah.
Of those leaders that considered this, it says their reasoning is the immense stress of the job, the current political divisions, and the feeling lonely and isolated. Those are all factors that have negatively impacted their ability to lead their church within the past year. And so I wanted to ask you, as you look at that, I would imagine in some sense every generation of pastors thinks that what they do is difficult, but comparing your years in ministry, do you think it's more difficult to lead a church these days than maybe ever, at least in your career?
Definitely in my life. Time for multiple reasons, and again, the question alludes to it. It's COVID followed by political disruption, and then the other factor is in evangelicalism. We're an evangelical church. There has been a shift, unfortunately, in evangelicalism toward fundamentalism, and we've sort of gotten the worst of both rather than the best of either, and that has created, it's just made it difficult for anybody who's trying to stay faithful to what God has called them to be as a senior leader or any kind of leader in the local church.
And you know, the heartbeat of this quote too, down in there is that pastor that is feeling get pulled around. I know there's been times over the last season where we felt like we've gotten arrows from both sides.
Yeah,
and you feel like
mostly in our back.
Yeah, mostly
both sides,
but from both sides.
Yeah,
and there's a side of you that say, well, gosh, if we're getting arrows from both sides, we might be doing something right or wrong. I don't know. But at the heartbeat of this quote, there's a pastor that's working to try to stay healthy because they got into ministry for all the right reasons, and they feel committed and they feel called to be here. But there's a quest to try to stay healthy in a world of leadership that's more divided than ever. So,
well, I want to acknowledge the obvious. I have a huge advantage. I actually have several advantages, none of which I can take credit for. One is I've been around long enough that I've seen a version of this movie before. You know, and in the moment it seems like this is the end of the world. The sky is falling. It's never going to be the same. The church is under attack. They're taking away our religious liberties, or the country's gone. You know, whichever way people are concerned, it's gone. And none of those things are true. You know, the pendulum swings, but in our context as a country, the pendulum doesn't swing very far. It feels like it does. It's the only pendulum swing we know. But then, like many of our people watching, you travel to other parts of the world, you realize, oh no, we're fine. You know, we're fine. So part of it is, I feel like just because of my age and experience, I have context, and context brings comfort, because it's like, no, this is just another one of those things that's happened before, and it's going to happen again, hopefully, no time soon. The other things that I wrote down is, obviously, we're in a large church. We have big budgets. We have lots of people. So, you know, people have left our churches for two or three waves over the past 2 or 3 years as we continue to create, you know, ask questions and do things people don't necessarily think we ought to do, but we can handle that. It's the pastors in smaller, not even small, but smaller churches that feel essentially what we may feel personally, but we don't feel in terms of the impact to the organization. So I just want to acknowledge our situation is a little bit different. But here are some things that sort of personally I've retreated to that I think have helped me personally, because I feel the weight of that. I get my feelings hurt when people leave, especially people that have been here a long, long time. And as you know, even recently, because you've helped me with this, Billy, we've met with dozens of families who over the past 2.5 years, but even more recently, have decided to leave the church. And these are people who've been very involved, and it's painful. So we're not immune to the pain, but we are certainly more immune to the impact of the health of the church. So when the word I used is ingloriously, when I ingloriously resigned from First Baptist Church of Atlanta, working for my dad almost 29 years ago, for me and for Sandra, for our family, that was such a defining moment that for us, it was basically a stake in the ground where you decide you do the right thing and you just trust God with the consequences, which is what my dad raised me to do. In fact, that was kind of our funny conversation through those years. I'm like, Dad, I'm doing exactly what you raised me to do. I'm doing what I think God wants me to do, and I'm allowing him to deal with the consequences. You can't control outcomes. For us as a family, that was such a defining moment that I think it is easier for me to withstand the current controversy, because I decided a long time ago I am called to perform for an audience of one. And that doesn't mean I don't have accountability or we don't have a board, but at the end of the day, if I have a clear conscience with my Heavenly Father, then I go to bed with a clear conscience, and the outcomes are beyond my control, and I don't want to try to manipulate outcomes because that's always a disaster. So that's a lesson I learned years ago, that when I start to get wobbly, or I feel like I've got to win something or convince somebody or save something or change something in order to save something, I just step back into, nope, that is not my responsibility. But again, those experiences all those years ago, that is an anchor point to me, that is a reference point in times like this. I feel like I see success and failure differently. It's easier for me not to cling to the rewards of success. And it's another lesson for another day, but success is what you're currently doing. Success is faithfulness. The rewards of success we confuse with success. So it is easier, I think, for me not to cling to those rewards, which is size and success and reputation and all those things, because of some lessons we learned years ago. And for some of our leaders, and for some of the leaders that will come to Drive, this is really kind of their first round of this, and this will be somewhat of their defining moment, and they're in their late 20s or 30s, and when they're my age, they will look back and go, oh yeah, this isn't new. I remember back after the pandemic, I remember when political things disrupted the church. I remember what God taught me in those years. That chapter of your life and experience. So I feel like part of my responsibility, again, why we do Drive, is to say, hey, the leaders who come, the leaders who are part of our network, you're going to be fine. Your family's going to be fine. God is, Jesus is still on the throne. If you can remain faithful, you'll be not the last man or woman standing, but you'll be a part of a remnant that then is going to have extraordinary responsibility and opportunity in the local church. So, and then, I don't know that this is good or not, But the other lesson I've learned through the years is I have pretty low expectations of people in general, which which sounds terrible. But and I don't mean I don't love people. I just mean people are people, right?
Yeah.
They're just people, and we all have fears. We all have insecurities. We all believe certain things and have a hard time believing other things. So I've just have a lower expectation.
Yeah.
So I think I'm less surprised sometimes, or less shocked. And even in this current season that we're in with what's happening politically and spiritually and with the evangelical church, part of me is like, people are people. We're all broken. We're all trying to figure it out. So just relax, love people, and give them grace, and never, ever return evil for evil. Every time, we can talk about this in a minute, anytime there's criticism, it's an opportunity to return good for evil. But we have to remind ourselves of that.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, I want to switch gears and talk a little more strategically, just as a church leader here. So obviously the last 3 years have been, we like to say they were unprecedented. They're a different version of whatever was before, whether it's unprecedented or not. But talk for a little bit about this last 3 years at North Point. And what is the last season of the last 3 years prompted North Point strategically to try differently?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we've done, we have doubled down on being outward facing in terms of the community and our reputation in our local communities. The way we say it here is we want the community to know we're here, to be glad we're here, and to be better off because we're here. So we created that language to keep that mission out front and center. And really, COVID gave us that opportunity to do that, and we've sort of ramped up some of that and continue to ramp up some of that. So that's one of the big ways that we've, I think, responded to some of these challenges. Instead of trying to keep people from leaving, because people are going to do what they're going to do, it's like, what can we do to the community, for the community? Because we want to be a very evangelistic, to use that old term, church that's very outward facing. So what we do in the community has been a big part. Our Be Rich campaigns have been bigger than ever. And for most of you know what that is, but it's our opportunity to raise money to give away to charities in the community. They've been fantastic. Mm-hmm. So all those kinds of things. So anyway, those are some of the things that we've done in this season.
Good. Yeah. So I want you to talk to the ministry leader that's out there that has a new idea, that feels like something needs to shift, as a paradigm needs to change, strategy needs to change in their church. And as many audiences likely know, making changes, people don't usually like that.
Right,
they're challenging, and those changing of paradigms usually they don't come without resistance. They usually involve criticism. People leave, as you're talking about. And so talk about your approach to criticism and challenge, maybe personally as a leader, but maybe as an organizational leader. I've heard you talk a lot about your effort to find something helpful in critique and criticism from people, even when it's hard to do that. So say a little bit more about that.
Well, unfortunately, there's probably a little thread of truth in every criticism. And I'm a big advocate for be a student, not a critic, be a student, not a critic, or be a student first before you're a critic, which means I have to be a student of my critics before I can be a critic of my critic. Mm-hmm. And I get my feelings hurt just like everybody else. But I've learned, if I'm not willing to learn from my critics, and if I'm not willing to be self-aware enough to know, okay, that hurts my feelings, that stings, I want to lash out, I want to react. Okay, but what can I learn? Mm-hmm. Well, that's just better.
Yeah.
Okay, it requires self-control, which is a fruit of the Spirit. It really is a test of, where do I stand in terms of my security with my Heavenly Father, and am I willing to learn from the critics and from criticism? So I have to talk myself down like everybody else. Sandra takes my phone away from me. Don't respond to that. That's why I'm not above that. But again, with age and maturity, you realize there's a lot to learn from critics. Where it's hard for church leaders is not so much the outside critics. It's the internal critics. It's the people who are sitting in the church, who've been there a long time, who've been there maybe longer than you have. Elders. That's more challenging. But there's an opportunity to learn. In terms of outside critics, one of the things I wrote down is I actually try to befriend them, and sometimes I'm successful. For people like me, I'm just picture. I'm an avatar. I'm not a real person. So people will say the rudest things. I mean, you're like, these are Christians. You look at their bios, like, I love coffee and Jesus and my husband, and I'm like, but look what you said about me that you would never say to me. I really don't understand that, except I have low expectation of humans. Social media has done that for all of us. But then again, it's like, okay, what can I do for this person? So if somebody actually follows me in a social media environment, I send them stuff. I'll say, hey, I saw your tweet or saw your post. I've written a book about that. I'd love to send you, I'm just not going to return, or try not to return evil for evil. And again, last thing is for church leaders, there are I stole this phrase from Mark Burnett. He talks about thoughtful Christians. Mm-hmm. And we all know when I say thoughtful Christian, it's like they're mature, not just mature, they're thoughtful Christians. Yeah. And criticism from thoughtful Christians should weigh in more than criticism from just not thoughtful Christians. Mm-hmm. And encouragement from thoughtful Christians should weigh heavier than some of the criticism of non-thoughtful Christians. So in this current season for us, I got a handwritten note from Philip Yancey. Mm-hmm. Now I don't know Philip Yancey. We're not friends. I think I've met him one time. I've read most of his books, and out of the blue, I get 4 lines, just a card, handwritten note, Philip Yancey. Well, that weighs in big time. And so again, those are those moments where you feel like, okay, we're doing the right thing, we're moving in the right direction. I'm gonna take that as a sign. So it's sort of a balancing act, but hopefully whatever ministry context people are working in, they get enough of that, not to lose their mind over the negative, and to, keep moving forward with the things that matter.
Yeah, so that's good. So I want to go big picture. North Point Ministries has been around for 28 years now, and so now we have a little bit of history under the road. I want to ask you 2 questions that are related to kind of the full arc of North Point Ministries here. So firstly, what part of the ministry strategy would you say has changed the most over those almost 3 decades of ministry here? What do you feel like has shifted the most? And you can imagine where I'm coming with the second question in a second. But what seems to have changed the most intentionally?
Well, the word I used a few years ago when I knew we needed to make some changes, I said, in the old days, our ministry model in some ways was that of a barista, where you stand behind the counter and people line up and you just serve, but they're lined up out the door. When we first started, we couldn't create enough space, we couldn't build enough buildings, we couldn't buy enough chairs. So it almost forced us into a mode of just take care of the people who were coming. Well, but then we were kind of the only hot dog stand in town. If you liked our model of ministry, there weren't many options in the Southeast, or certainly the Atlanta area. Well, that changed, which is fortunate. That's a good thing. We've hopefully helped influence the churches. But when that changed, we were not as quick. We recognized that something had happened. We recognized that it wasn't like those days. But like most organizations, we weren't as quick to change how we approach ministry as we should have been. So I said, hey, we're not baristas anymore. We're missionaries. We got to change our mindset to think more in terms of what a missionary does. And even though that's an old term, and I kept trying to come up with a better term, that's we're missionaries, right? We're on a mission within a culture that needs Jesus. So that terminology, and but working with you and with our staff to shift our thinking in terms of, okay, we can't assume anything anymore. That then, I think, forced us or empowered us to begin making some small and some major tweaks along the way. And I think for any church that stays in the mindset of a missionary, you're just going to make better decisions, and you're going to make more culturally relevant decisions. But most importantly, you continue to be an outward-facing organization. And I'm convinced when local church leaders are committed to reaching unchurched people and reaching people who are de-churched, if that's the commitment, you're going to have less problems internally. You're going to have less cynicism. You're going to have less tolerance for silly things. You're not going to argue over stupid things because there's something at stake. But once a local church, modern or not, becomes internally focused. And again, that's what's happening with this shift in evangelicalism toward fundamentalism. It becomes a very insular, inside focused, we're the good people, they're the bad people, we're God's people, they're the, as soon as you do that, you are no longer acting like a missionary.
Yeah.
You're acting like a remnant that's waiting for Jesus to come back. And that is not the Great Commission. The Great Commission isn't huddle up and hang in there. The Great Commission is to go into every nation. Well, as we know, that's a mindset, but that's a very difficult mindset to maintain when there's criticism from within, especially the people in your local church. And again, one of the reasons we do Drive is to gather outward-facing church leaders, or church leaders who want to lead their church to be more outward-facing, to say two things. Number one, you're not alone. And as I said earlier, you're not crazy. And then here's what we've learned along the way to help maintain that outward focus, because you're going to be healthier. You're positioned for even numeric success, especially once we get through some of the craziness we're in right now. So, that's always the fight, because the gravitational pull of the local church is always toward insiders, always, and that never changes. So if we're not positioned to fight and resist that gravitational pull, we end up being an inward-facing church, and once you do that, you're not on a mission anymore. You're definitely not functioning like a missionary. Imagine a group of missionaries going to a country and just huddling up. I'm just like, what are you doing here? I mean, you're on a mission, to reach people. So I think that's been the struggle, or that's been the tension we've wrestled with, and I think we've wrestled with it pretty successfully. And those decisions, or that mindset, is really what has forced us or inspired us to make some of the changes we have. And so and this is one of the things we talk about at Drive. We always say we're not there yet. That's kind of the byline of Drive. Drive, we're not there yet. And essentially what we say is, here are the principles. Here's how we've applied the principles. Now you go back into your culture and your context and you apply these same principles. So don't do what we do, but maybe pay attention to why we do what we do, because that's always transferable.
Yeah. You might have answered the second part of this question in your first part, because I heard it in there, because I think I know what you're going to say. But the follow-up to that is, what part of our ministry strategy have you and the team had to fight to keep the same? Meaning that we know something's got to change, but this is like, no, this is what we started with. We've believed in it every step of the way, and we've had to claw and fight to keep it there.
Well, it's two things. And again, you have to create terminology around the things you don't want to change, because the terminology becomes a guardrail, and when you bump up against something that's so clear, everybody's like, oops, we're on the edge of the road. And so one of them is assume they're in the room, assume they're in the room, assume they're in the room, assume unbelievers are in the room, all the rooms, the lobby, the small group rooms, with our kids in the auditorium on Sunday morning, assume they're in the room. That guards us from forgetting they're in the room, just talking to ourselves, preaching to the choir. And then the second one is what we refer to as our rules of engagement, in terms of how we plan ministry environments, both for high school, middle school specifically, certainly for adults. So the rules of engagement, assume they're in the room, as again, and the expressions of those change every few years as culture changes, but the commitment to those fundamental ideas, those are the things that we accidentally mess up. And when we accidentally mess up, we pay for it in terms of how we've communicated to people who aren't church people. So we cling to those. But again, you got to have language, or you drift because of the gravitational pull of the local church.
Right. That's so good. I wanted to ask you real quickly about Drive Conference, considering it's coming up and it's near and dear to my heart too. So Drive Conference started in 2005. This will be our 12th Drive Conference every other year since then. We've got a lot going on. Our staff's busy. I think in 2022, last time we did it, we actually subsidized Drive so we could make it. So it's not a moneymaker for us.
Nope.
We're just hoping to break even, which is part of my responsibility this year.
We did not break even last time.
We did not. So all that to say, we've got a lot going on. Why do Drive Conference? Why is this something organizationally that we've believed in ever since 2005? Why is it important to you?
Well, first of all, the reason we do it every other year is the answer to that question, I should say, is why we do it every other year. Drive is our opportunity to say, hey, we can't fill your cup You're smart. You know what you're doing in your local ministry context. Here's everything we know. So we're going to empty our cup, and we're not going to fill yours because we don't have the capacity to do that. Here's everything we know about that. Here's everything we've changed since last time we were together. Here's everything we've learned since last time we were together. So when we did Drive in 2005, the first one, there was so much excitement with the staff afterwards, just like, let's do it again next year. I'm like, no, the goal isn't to have a leadership conference. The goal is to have a conference where we have something new, or at least a new perspective on some things that help other churches. And we just don't learn that much in 12 months, right? So let's do it every other year. Every other year, we've changed enough, learned enough. Again, we don't have all the answers. Again, we've not arrived. That's why we got to drive. So that's why we do it every year. So it's an opportunity for us to export what we've learned over the course of 2 years. And because our church network is so large, we're not simply learning from North Point Community Church or even our Atlanta area churches. Now we have the capacity to learn from churches in our network all over the country that are doing new and unique things that we're in the, and as you know, Billy, we learn from them oftentimes that are importing their ideas here. So it's an opportunity to say, here's what we've learned, here's what we're doing, take it home and contextualize it. The other thing it does for us selfishly, it forces us to do what we tell church leaders they need to do all the time, and that is to answer the question, why are you doing this? Now, why are you doing this particular ministry? Why are you doing high school that way? Why are you doing middle school that way? Because, as you know, when you're going to teach something, it forces you to look in the mirror and say, hey, are we actually doing this? Yeah. And if we're not actually doing it, and we should do it, we need to do it. If we're not actually doing it because we don't think it's relevant anymore, well, then let's not teach it or export it. So it really forces us to do some housekeeping and, even internally.
It's good for us.
But the other great thing, maybe the biggest takeaway for Drive, is not what people learn. It's who they get to be around. And when you're around a couple thousand church leaders, and most people come with teams who are, again, committed to the same goal and the same, not model necessarily, but the same approach in terms of being outward-facing church, the people leave here just encouraged, and they go back and they're encouraged, and they go back with a new sense of passion. Not just a bunch of new creative ideas, but new passion around what they're doing and why they're doing it, and the fact, again, that they're not alone. So it's part of it is just that the community that people experience those 2 days.
Yeah, that's good. I feel like you've given them a lot of good reasons to come.
Well, I'm going to throw this back to you because for those of you listening, Billy is the mastermind behind the details, the breakouts. I don't know if you want to talk about some of the things we're going to talk about this year.
Yeah, don't get me started. I love Drive. I love that our team gets to lead it. I've gotten more and more excited where I'm sitting in meetings even now, starting. We've got 4 main sessions that we'll do with everybody together, worship, great time, great teaching. We'll have 44 different breakout sessions, which are amazing. They cover everything from kids ministry, student ministry, adult ministry, groups ministry, church administration. We're doing a couple of breakouts on staff culture. We're doing, in this day and age, some breakouts on digital ministry, social media. We're doing kind of highlighting some of the things that, again, if you said we try and we work on so we can empty our cup on how we do care ministry, how we do missions, how we do everything that we do here, so that you might go back and contextualize it. So I love the equipment part of it as well. But like you said, I love just the encouragement that people get coming and being in a room full of people that know, wow, I'm not the only one, especially for people that come from small communities that feel like I'm doing ministry not like anyone else in my community. There are other people that are out there. And lastly, I just love to see teams, as you mentioned, come in and just get a break, that they don't have to run the show. They don't have to worry about anything. They can just come and worship and refresh. And so I'm super excited about it. And I know that you love it. And I know our teams love it too. They put in a lot of work, but they come out of it energized.
And there's some expense and some cost for, especially we have churches will bring 20, 30 people sometimes, and then a lot of senior pastors, leaders will just come by themselves. Or like, I need a break from my staff. I just need to sit and absorb and take notes and just be isolated, from all that. So there's all kinds of reasons people come, and people come with all size groups.
Andy, thanks for your time today. And thanks for your time today, too. And thank you for tuning in. And we sincerely hope that you will consider joining us for the Drive Conference. It's May 1st and 2nd, and you've still got a chance to take advantage of early bird pricing, because the pricing goes up on February 1st. So get in there before February 1st, which is right around the corner. All the information that you're going to need, including the topics for all 44 breakouts and all the registration registration details are found at driveconference.com. And so